There is a version of this planet most of us never see. We live inside cities of straight lines and screens, and we forget that somewhere, right now, water is carving cathedrals out of stone, deserts are turning red at dawn, and entire mountains are floating in cloud. These are not paintings. They are not digital effects. They are real places, on the same earth you woke up on this morning, and people cross entire continents just to stand in front of them for a single minute. Over the next half hour, we count down 15 of them. From a lake in the Alps with a church on its own island, to a pool of living color in an American wilderness, to a mirror the size of a small country where the sky and the ground become the same thing. Some you may recognize, others you may never have heard of. But every one of them has, at some point, made travelers fall completely silent. This is the countdown of the 15 most beautiful places on planet Earth that stopped the world in its tracks. Number 15. Lake Bled, Slovenia. Tucked into the foothills of the Julian Alps, Lake Bled is a glacial lake just over 2 kilometers long and around 30 meters deep, fed by warm thermal springs that keep its water swimmable well into the summer. At its center sits Bled Island, the only natural island in the entire country. On that island stands a church first built more than 1,000 years ago, reached by 99 stone steps that grooms have traditionally carried their brides up before ringing the wishing bell inside. Local tradition holds that if you ring it and your heart is pure, your wish comes true. Above the water, perched on a rocky cliff, 130 meters high, a medieval castle has watched over the lake since at least the year 1011, making it one of the oldest castles in Slovenia. From its ramparts, the whole valley opens up beneath you. In autumn, the surrounding forest turns gold and copper, and the entire scene doubles itself in the mirror-still water. Island, church, castle, and mountains repeated perfectly below. It is the kind of place that looks staged, like a film set someone forgot to take down, and yet families have lived here, married here, and buried their dead here for 1,000 years. Would you climb 99 steps carrying someone you love just to ring a bell for a single wish? Number 14. Pamukkale, Turkey. The name means cotton castle, and from a distance that is exactly what it looks like. An entire hillside that appears draped in fresh snow in the middle of a warm Turkish valley. But there is no snow here, and it never melts. What you are seeing is travertine, a chalk-white mineral left behind by hot springs that have been flowing down this slope for thousands of years. Water heated deep underground rises to the surface at around 35 degrees Celsius, carrying dissolved calcium carbonate. As it spills across the terraces and cools in the open air, the mineral hardens into brilliant white basins, each one holding a shallow pool of turquoise water, stacked one above the next like steps built for giants. The site has drawn people for over 2 millennia. The ancient Romans were so taken with the springs that they built the spa city of Hierapolis directly on top of the hill, and today you can still bathe among sunken marble columns and toppled temple stones in what is now called Cleopatra's Pool, floating over 2,000-year-old ruins in mineral water. Pamukkale is considered so significant that it is protected as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Visitors must remove their shoes and walk barefoot across the terraces, both to protect the fragile stone from being stained and because the wet travertine is smooth as polished marble underfoot. Number 13. Diadvlai, Namibia. Deep inside the Namib, one of the oldest deserts on Earth, at an estimated 55 million years old, there is a cracked white clay pan surrounded by some of the tallest sand dunes in the world. Several of them rise over 300 meters, including a giant nicknamed Big Daddy, taller than the Eiffel Tower. But the reason people fly across the world to reach this one small pan is what stands on it. Scattered across the bone-white clay are the blackened skeletons of camel thorn trees that died roughly 700 years ago, when the climate shifted and the river that once fed them was choked off by advancing sand. And here is the strange part. The desert is so brutally dry that the trees never decomposed. They did not rot away. Wood-eating fungi and insects cannot survive here. So the trees simply scorched black under the relentless sun and have stood in place, dead but not gone, for 7 centuries. Against the white pan below, the burning orange dunes behind, and a hard, cloudless blue sky above, the effect is almost unreal. 4 colors that seem too saturated to be natural, and shapes that look painted rather than grown. Photographers routinely rank it among the most surreal landscapes on the planet. It is beauty and death held together in the same silent frame, and standing among those trees, you can hear absolutely nothing at all. Number 12. Antelope Canyon, Arizona, United States. On the surface, there is almost nothing to see. Just a narrow crack in the flat desert floor on Navajo land near the town of Page. You could walk within a few meters of it and never know it was there, but descend through that crack and the world changes completely. Antelope Canyon is a slot canyon, carved over millions of years by flash floods tearing through soft Navajo sandstone, scouring and polishing the rock grain by grain. The walls rise up to 20 meters overhead and press close together, sculpted into smooth, flowing waves of orange, purple, red, and gold that seem to ripple like liquid frozen mid-motion. For a few minutes around midday, when the sun climbs high enough to align with the opening above, shafts of light punch straight down through the gap and land on the sandy floor like solid golden beams you feel you could reach out and hold. Dust, drifting in the air, makes them glow. The Navajo name for the upper canyon translates roughly to the place where water runs through rocks, and that water is also the danger. The same flash floods that sculpted this beauty still surge through it without warning, which is why visitors are only permitted inside with local guides who constantly watch the weather for miles around. Have you ever seen sunlight look solid enough to catch in your hands? Number 11. Ha Long Bay, Vietnam. In the Gulf of Tonkin, off the northeastern coast of Vietnam, nearly 2,000 limestone islands and sea stacks rise straight up out of calm emerald green water. Some are barely larger than a boat. Others are tall, forested peaks, hiding grottos and hollow caves within. These towers are the product of more than 500 million years of geological history, then shaped by a further 20 million years of tropical monsoon rain and rising seas, slowly dissolving the limestone from the inside out. The result is a vast watery labyrinth of jagged green peaks, hidden lagoons you can only reach by paddling through low cave mouths, and caverns large enough to swallow entire buildings. Local legend tells it differently. The bay, it is said, was formed by a great dragon sent down from the mountains, its massive thrashing tail gouging valleys and crevices into the land, which then filled with seawater until only the highest ridges remained above the surface. That is why the name Ha Long means descending dragon. And people do not just visit. Fishing communities still live here permanently, in floating villages, entire neighborhoods of homes, shops, and even schools resting on pontoons on the water between the peaks. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, one of the new 7 natural wonders of the world, and consistently ranked among the most beautiful seascapes anywhere on Earth. Number 10. Grand Prismatic Spring, Yellowstone, United States. In the middle of Wyoming's Yellowstone National Park lies the largest hot spring in the United States and the 3rd largest on the entire planet. A pool roughly 90 meters across and more than 50 meters deep, larger than a football field. Seen from the air, it looks like an enormous eye staring straight up out of the earth, ringed in glowing bands of blazing orange, rust red, and green that fade inward to a deep, almost electric blue at the very center, and those colors are alive. The vivid rings around the edge are not minerals, but vast mats of heat-loving microbes each species surviving in a narrow band of temperature, arranging themselves into ordered stripes as the water cools with distance from the center. The deep blue heart of the pool is nearly sterile because it is simply too hot for almost anything to live. Around 87 degrees Celsius, well past scalding, hot enough to kill in seconds. The colors even shift with the seasons, warming toward orange and red in summer and deepening to green in the cooler months as the microbes respond to changing light and heat. It is one of the very few places on Earth where the beauty you are looking at is not just rock, water, and light, but billions of living organisms sorted by temperature into a perfect, breathing rainbow. Number 9. Cappadocia, Turkey. In central Anatolia, ancient volcanic eruptions once buried the whole region under a thick blanket of soft ash that slowly hardened into rock. Over millions of years, wind and water eroded that rock into a bizarre forest of tapering stone spires, cones, and towers that locals call fairy chimneys, some capped with a harder boulder balanced on top like a hat. But the people here did not simply admire this landscape, they moved straight into it. For thousands of years, inhabitants hollowed out homes, stables, churches, and even entire underground cities inside the soft stone, some of them descending as many as 18 levels beneath the surface and once sheltering tens of thousands of people from invading armies. Whole civilizations lived below ground. Today, Cappadocia is famous the world over for something that happens in the first light of morning. On clear mornings, more than 100 hot air balloons lift off together and drift silently over the valleys of stone, their burners glowing, turning the dawn sky into a slow-moving field of color above the fairy chimneys. It has become one of the single most photographed sights on the planet. And travelers who have stood in one of those baskets at sunrise, gliding in near-total silence over a landscape people have been living inside for millennia, tend to describe it in the same word: unforgettable. Number 8. Plitvice Lakes, Croatia. Croatia's oldest and largest national park protects a staircase of 16 terraced lakes that spill endlessly into one another through a cascade of waterfalls, all cradled inside a dense, ancient beech and fir forest. What makes Plitvice truly extraordinary is that the lakes are actively building themselves, right now, as you watch. The water here is unusually rich in dissolved minerals, and a specific combination of algae, moss, and bacteria traps calcium carbonate out of it, cementing it grain by grain into natural dams of a porous rock called travertine. Those living barriers grow taller by roughly a centimeter or more every year, constantly reshaping the lakes and giving birth to new waterfalls over time. This is a landscape that is never finished. The water is famous for its color, impossible shades of turquoise, azure, jade, and emerald that shift hour by hour depending on the mineral content, the angle of the sunlight, and the depth beneath. Wooden walkways and footbridges carry visitors directly across and just above the surface, so close that you can watch fish hanging motionless over submerged fallen trees in water so clear it looks like polished glass. The entire system drains toward Veliki Slap, the park's tallest waterfall, dropping roughly 78 meters in a single plunge. Would you trust a narrow boardwalk floating just inches above water this clear and this cold? Number 7. Vinicunca, the Rainbow Mountain, Peru. High in the Peruvian Andes, at an altitude of over 5,000 meters, higher than almost any mountain in the Alps, there is a single ridge striped in vivid bands of red, gold, green, lavender, and turquoise, as though a giant had poured buckets of paint down its slopes and let them run. But this is not paint, and it is not a photographic trick. Each colored layer is a different mineral sediment laid down horizontally over millions of years, and then folded and tilted almost upright by the same colossal tectonic forces that pushed up the Andes themselves. Iron oxides produce the deep reds and rusty yellows, copper minerals lend the greens, and other sediments fill in the rest of the spectrum. Here is the remarkable thing. For almost all of recorded history, no human being ever saw these colors at all. The entire ridge lay hidden beneath a permanent cap of snow and ice. Only as that ice retreated over the past decade or so did the painted mountain finally emerge into daylight, and it swiftly became one of Peru's most visited natural wonders. Reaching it remains a genuine physical trial. The air up there holds only about half the oxygen your lungs are used to at sea level, so hikers climb slowly, hearts pounding, stopping often to breathe. But waiting at the top is a mountain that looks like it was borrowed from another world entirely. Number 6. Socotra Island, Yemen. 400 kilometers off the southern coast of the Arabian Peninsula, marooned alone in the Indian Ocean, lies an island so remote and so long isolated that roughly a third of its plant species exist nowhere else on Earth. Socotra broke away from the mainland millions of years ago, and its life has been evolving in near-total isolation ever since, producing shapes and forms that look, quite honestly, alien. The most famous of them is the dragon's blood tree, a tree shaped like an umbrella turned completely inside out, with a dense, tightly packed canopy of upward-reaching branches that, seen from below, resembles an enormous green mushroom or a spray of coral standing in the desert. When its bark is cut, it bleeds a deep crimson-red sap, and that blood-colored resin has been harvested and prized as medicine, dye, and incense since ancient times. Growing alongside them are swollen, bulbous bottle trees and delicate desert roses that seem to hoard the entire landscape's water inside their fat trunks. Scientists and travel writers alike have called Socotra the most alien-looking place on Earth, and UNESCO protects the whole archipelago as a World Heritage Site. To walk among a grove of dragon's blood trees as the sun sinks low is to feel, powerfully and unmistakably, that you have wandered onto another planet without ever leaving this one. Number 5. Milford Sound, New Zealand. On the rugged southwest coast of New Zealand's South Island, buried inside the vast wilderness of Fiordland National Park. A narrow fjord carves 15 kilometers inland from the Tasman Sea, hemmed in on both sides by sheer rock cliffs that rise more than 200 meters straight up out of deep, dark water. The most famous of those cliffs, Mitre Peak, climbs to around 690 meters almost vertically from the surface, making it one of the tallest peaks anywhere in the world to rise directly from the sea. This is also one of the wettest inhabited places on the planet, drenched by several meters of rain a year, and that rain is the entire secret to its beauty. After a heavy downpour, hundreds of temporary waterfalls burst into life on the cliff faces all at once, pouring thousands of feet down the black rock in silver ribbons, while two enormous, permanent falls thunder year-round no matter the weather. The constant rain also produces something rare. A layer of fresh water, stained tea-brown by tannins washed out of the forest, that floats on top of the denser seawater and dims the light below, tricking deep-sea creatures like black coral into living at unusually shallow depths. The writer Rudyard Kipling is said to have called Milford Sound the eighth wonder of the world. Standing small at the water's edge beneath those towering walls, it is very easy to understand exactly why he did. Number 4. Zhangjiajie, China. In the Wulingyuan scenic area of Hunan province rise more than 3,000 slender quartz sandstone pillars, some towering over 200 meters into the air, their flat summits crowned with tenacious green trees, and their bases lost far below in drifting white mist. And here is what surprises most people. These towers were not pushed up from underground. They were left behind. Over millions of years, running water, frost, and the slow work of plant roots gradually stripped away all the softer rock that once surrounded them, until only these hard, isolated vertical columns remained standing alone in the void. On misty mornings, the lower halves of the pillars disappear completely into cloud, and only their tree-topped summits float above the white, hanging in mid-air like islands, drifting in a silent sea. The landscape was so striking and so improbable that it helped inspire the floating mountains of a famous science fiction blockbuster, and afterward, one of the real pillars was officially renamed in the movie's honor. Woven between and across these stone towers are some of the most nerve-shredding walkways on Earth. Glass-bottomed bridges strung between cliffs and narrow paths, bolted to sheer rock faces where, with a single glance down, the ground simply falls away hundreds of meters beneath your feet. The entire area is protected as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. How would it feel to step out onto a pane of glass with a 300-meter drop directly below your shoes? Number 3. Iguazu Falls, on the border of Argentina and Brazil, where the wide Iguazu River finally reaches the edge of a vast ancient basalt plateau. It does not simply fall in one clean curtain like most great waterfalls. It shatters. The river breaks apart into a sprawling system of somewhere between 150 and 300 separate waterfalls, spread across a curving front nearly 3 kilometers wide, which makes it the largest waterfall system anywhere in the world. Far wider than Niagara and taller too. At peak flow during the rainy season, well over 1 million liters of water crash over the edge every single second. The dark, beating heart of it all is a U-shaped chasm named the Devil's Throat, where the full force of the river collapses into a gorge around 80 meters deep, hurling up a permanent cloud of mist and a roar so loud it can be heard long before the falls themselves come into view. Rainbows form, dissolve, and reappear constantly in the drifting spray, and great swifts perform an astonishing trick. They fly straight through the falling curtains of water to reach hidden nests on the wet cliffs behind. When Eleanor Roosevelt, then the First Lady of the United States, first laid eyes on Iguazu, she is said to have thought instantly of Niagara Falls back home, and found it left Niagara far, far behind. Both nations guard their side of the falls as a national park and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Number 2. The Northern Lights over Lofoten, Norway. High above the Arctic Circle, along Norway's dramatic Lofoten Islands, jagged, snow-dusted mountains rise straight out of the sea beside tiny fishing villages of red and ochre wooden cabins perched on stilts over the water. It is a beautiful place in broad daylight, but on cold, clear winter nights, the sky itself catches fire. The aurora borealis is created when streams of electrically charged particles blasted out by the sun race across space and slam into gases high in Earth's upper atmosphere. As those gases absorb and release the energy, they glow. Oxygen produces the signature green lower down and rare deep reds higher up, while nitrogen adds flickers of blue and violet. What you actually see is a vast, rippling curtain of light, folding and unfurling across the entire dome of the sky, sometimes drifting slow and dreamlike, sometimes suddenly surging and dancing in waves faster than your eye can follow. Because Lofoten sits directly beneath the auroral zone and faces out over open, dark water, the lights are frequently mirrored on the sea below, doubling the entire spectacle. For countless centuries, people who did not understand it invented myths to explain the lights. The spirits of ancestors, warnings from the gods, the souls of the departed dancing across the heavens. Today we understand the physics completely, and somehow that knowledge has not made the sight any less overwhelming. To stand alone on a dark, frozen beach and watch the whole sky burn silent green above you is something almost no one ever forgets. And number 1. Salar de Uyuni, Bolivia. High on the remote Andean plateau at around 650 meters above sea level lies the largest salt flat on Earth. More than 10,000 square kilometers of blinding white salt, the ghostly dried-up floor of an enormous prehistoric lake that evaporated away thousands of years ago. In the dry season, it is a cracked, hexagon-patterned white plain that runs perfectly flat all the way to the horizon in every direction, so vast, so uniform, and so level that space agencies use its surface to calibrate the altitude measuring instruments on satellites orbiting the planet. It is, in effect, one of the flattest places in the entire world. But it is the wet season that earns Salar de Uyuni the #1 spot on this list. When a thin sheet of rainwater settles over the salt and cannot drain away, the entire surface transforms into the largest natural mirror on the face of the earth. The sky and the ground fuse into a single seamless whole. Clouds drift beneath your feet. People walking across it seem to be standing directly on the surface of the heavens, with no horizon line at all to tell you where the planet ends and the sky begins. And beneath all that quiet beauty lies something the modern world desperately wants. The flats hold one of the greatest reserves of lithium anywhere on the planet, the very metal packed inside nearly every phone, laptop, and electric car battery. Yet standing out there at sunset, ankle-deep in a perfect mirror of fire and cloud, not one thought of that ever crosses your mind. There is only the impossible, dizzying sensation of walking through the sky itself. Of every beautiful place on Earth, this is the one that most makes people stop and genuinely question what it is they are even looking at. So there they are, 15 places that stopped the world and made it stare. A church on an island in the Alps. A cotton castle of white stone, dead trees standing black for 700 years. Sunlight turned solid inside a desert crack. A dragon's bay, a living rainbow spring, 100 balloons over fairy chimneys, lakes that build themselves. A painted mountain, an alien island, a fjord walled in 100 waterfalls, floating stone pillars, the widest falls on Earth, the sky on fire over the Arctic, and a mirror the size of a small country. What ties all of them together is not simply that they are beautiful. It is that not a single one of them was designed for us. The Earth made every one of these entirely on its own, over spans of time we can barely begin to imagine, and we humans simply arrived late enough to see them and lucky enough to be able to travel there. Which of these 15 would you cross the world to stand in front of, just once, before you die? Tell me in the comments below. And if this journey moved something in you, stay with the channel. Because the planet, it turns out, has far more still to show us.